The gun was 3 feet away from me in the darkness, and Marcus Whitmore's hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't aim it properly. "This was supposed to be simple," he whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "One bullet staged the scene, call the police. Why did you have to make this so difficult?" I stayed crouched behind Gerald's mahogany desk, my 67-year-old heart hammering as I watched $20 million transfer from his father's accounts to children's cancer funds across the country. The computer screen cast an eerie blue glow in the basement, illuminating the wine collection that cost more than most people's homes and the silver letter opener they'd planted to frame me for theft. "You want to know what's really funny, Marcus?" I called out, my fingers flying across the keyboard even as he fumbled to reload. "Your family spent 35 years thinking I was just another invisible black woman who cleaned your toilets. You never bothered to ask what else I was qualified to do." Another gunshot exploded in the confined space, shattering a bottle of 1947 Chateau d'Yquem worth $40,000. Marcus was sobbing now, the privileged boy who'd never faced real consequences finally understanding that his empire was crumbling with every keystroke. "Who the hell are you?" he screamed. I emerged from behind the desk, holding Gerald's antique letter opener, the same one Victoria claimed I'd stolen, and smiled at the man who had just tried to murder me. "I'm someone who earned a PhD in computer science while you were buying your way through college. I'm someone who memorized every password to your family's criminal empire, while you thought I was dusting the furniture. And as of 30 seconds ago, I'm someone who just made your foundation actually help children for the first time in its existence." The basement door above us burst open as federal agents stormed down the stairs, but I wasn't finished yet. There was still one more transfer to make. The one that would save my granddaughter's life and expose a secret that would destroy everything the Whitmores thought they knew about power, family, and justice. But before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this, and if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps give me the strength to speak my truth. Now let's get into my story. It started 3 hours earlier, when Victoria Whitmore made the mistake of thinking she could break me. 3 hours earlier, I had been putting the finishing touches on the dining room table, arranging white orchids in crystal vases for the Whitmores' monthly dinner party. These gatherings were always the same. 8 of the city's wealthiest families coming together to discuss their charitable foundations while consuming wine that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Evelyn," Victoria had called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant trouble. She was dressed in a black Chanel dress that probably cost more than my annual salary, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon that revealed the diamond earrings her husband had bought her for their anniversary. "Yes, Mrs. Whitmore? There's been a change of plans for tonight." She didn't look at me directly, focusing instead on checking her lipstick in the reflection of the stainless steel refrigerator. "We won't be needing your services during dinner." This was unusual. I always served during their dinner parties, a fixture so constant that some of their guests knew me by name and asked about my grandchildren. Should I prepare the courses and leave them in the warming trays? "Actually," Victoria turned then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach clench. "Gerald and I have been discussing your situation." My situation? 3 weeks ago, Gerald Whitmore had cornered me in his study after I'd finished dusting his collection of first edition books. He'd been drinking. He often was by late afternoon, and his hands had wandered where they had no business being. When I'd firmly removed his hand from my arm and told him that wasn't appropriate, he'd laughed it off, saying I was misunderstanding his friendliness. The next week, several expensive items had gone missing from the house. Victoria's pearl necklace, Gerald's gold watch, a rare silver letter opener. I'd noticed them missing during my cleaning rounds and mentioned it to Victoria, thinking there might have been a break-in. Instead, she'd looked at me with cold calculation and said, "How interesting that you're the only one who would have noticed these particular items missing. Mrs. Whitmore, if you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything, Evelyn. I'm stating facts. Items are missing. You have access to every room in this house. You've been acting strange lately. Distracted." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. In 35 years, I had never taken so much as a paper clip from this house. I had cleaned around priceless artwork, handled jewelry worth more than most people's homes, and never once been anything but trustworthy. But I knew what this was really about. Gerald had told his wife about our encounter, probably spinning it to make himself look like the victim. This was their way of discrediting me, of making sure that if I ever spoke up about his inappropriate behavior, I'd look like a bitter employee with a history of theft. I would never steal from this family, I said quietly. I've been nothing but loyal. Loyalty doesn't pay the bills, does it, Evelyn? Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. And with your granddaughter's medical bills piling up, well, I imagine the temptation might be overwhelming. My blood ran cold. Maya, my 7-year-old granddaughter, had been battling leukemia for the past year. The treatments were experimental and expensive, far beyond what my insurance covered. I'd been working extra shifts, taking on additional families to clean for, doing whatever I could to help my daughter pay for Maya's care. The Whitmores knew this. I'd asked for advances on my salary several times, always paid back within weeks. I'd mentioned Maya's condition when I needed time off for hospital visits. I thought they understood, maybe even sympathized. I was wrong. So here's what's going to happen, Victoria continued, her voice taking on that honeyed tone she used when she was being particularly cruel. Tonight, you're going to wait in the basement while we have our dinner party. We can't risk having a suspected thief serving our guests, can we? Tomorrow morning, Gerald and I will discuss whether we'll be pressing charges or simply terminating your employment. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. Now you can go downstairs voluntarily, or I can call the police right now and have you arrested for theft. What's it going to be? I thought of Maya in her hospital bed, of my daughter Sarah working double shifts as a nurse to pay for treatments that might save her child's life. I thought of the 35 years I'd spent in this house, the birthdays I'd helped celebrate, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the family secrets I'd kept. And I walked downstairs. The basement felt like a tomb, but as the motion sensor lights flickered on, I realized it was more like a vault, Gerald's private sanctuary filled with secrets worth killing for. My hands were still shaking from rage, but my mind was crystallizing with dangerous clarity. 35 years of cleaning this basement, and I'd never truly seen what was here. The temperature-controlled wine cellar that cost more than most people's homes. The leather chairs where Gerald conducted his private meetings, with men in expensive suits who spoke in whispers. The mahogany desk that I'd dusted around hundreds of times, always careful not to disturb his precious papers. Tonight I wasn't being careful anymore. As I approached the desk, something glinted in the dim light. A silver letter opener. The same one Victoria claimed had been stolen. It was sitting right there in plain sight like bait in a trap. They'd planted evidence in their own basement, probably planning to discover it here tomorrow and frame me completely. But Gerald had made one fatal mistake in his arrogance. He'd left his computer on. The screen was displaying Gerald's personal email, and the subject line of the top message made my blood freeze. Final arrangements J situation. I clicked it open with trembling fingers. Michael, everything is in place for tomorrow morning. The planted evidence will be discovered during the police search. Make sure the detective understands this is a pattern of behavior. We've had suspicions for months. The theft charges should stick, and any harassment allegations will look like desperate lies from a convicted criminal. As discussed, the usual consulting fee will be transferred to your account once this is resolved. GW. They weren't just framing me. They had bought the police. My hands shook as I navigated through the folders on his desktop. Financial documents, correspondence with lawyers, records of charitable donations that seemed to flow right back into Whitmore family accounts through a complex web of shell companies and fake nonprofits. But it was the folder labeled Household Staff that made my stomach drop. Inside were detailed background checks on every person who had ever worked for the Whitmores going back 20 years. Nannies, gardeners, housekeepers, cooks. Everyone. Each file contained not just employment history, but deeply personal information. Medical records, family situations, financial difficulties, anything that could be used as leverage. My own file was thick, filled with details about Maya's illness, Sarah's debt, even information about my ex-husband's gambling problems from 15 years ago. But the most recent addition made my vision blur with anger. A police report filed 3 days ago, claiming that several valuable items had been stolen from the Whitmore residence. The report named me as the primary suspect and included a detailed list of my suspicious behavior over the past month. They hadn't just accused me of theft. They had already set the legal wheels in motion to have me arrested. But Gerald had made one crucial error in his arrogance. He'd saved draft emails in his personal folder, correspondence with his lawyer discussing the best way to handle the situation with the domestic staff member who was becoming problematic. One email, dated a week after Gerald's inappropriate advance, laid out the entire plan, plant evidence of theft, file a police report, and ensure that I would be too discredited and frightened to ever speak about what had really happened. The final line of the email made my hands clench into fists. The woman needs to learn her place. A few months in jail might teach her some humility. As I sat there in the dim light of the basement, listening to the laughter and clinking glasses from the dinner party above, I realized that this wasn't just about silencing me. This was about power, about reminding someone like me exactly where I stood in their world. But they had forgotten something important. I might clean their toilets, but I wasn't stupid. And I had access to something they'd never imagined I could use against them. I opened a new browser window and logged into the first of the Whitmore family accounts. My heart hammered as I realized the true scope of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about silencing me, this was a machine, a system designed to destroy anyone who threatened their empire. But they'd forgotten one crucial detail. When Marcus begged me to help set up their banking system 5 years ago, his incompetence had been my opportunity. While he'd fumbled with passwords and security settings, I'd memorized everything. Every account number, every security question, every backup protocol. I navigated to the banking dashboard, my fingers moving with muscle memory from those long nights helping Marcus. Account after account opened before me, revealing an empire built on lies. The numbers were staggering, hundreds of millions hidden in a web of shell companies and fake charities. But it was the folder labeled insurance policies that made me gasp. Inside were videos, security camera footage from Gerald's study, showing him with his hands on me 3 weeks ago. But the timestamp had been altered, and the audio edited to make it sound like I was threatening him, demanding money. They weren't just planning to destroy my reputation, they were going to claim I had been blackmailing Gerald, that the theft was part of a larger extortion scheme. The final video file was labeled contingency. It showed Gerald in this very basement, speaking directly to the camera like he was recording a confession. If you're watching this, it means the situation with our domestic staff has escalated beyond containment, his recorded voice said. Evelyn Jenkins has been embezzling from us for years, using her position to steal jewelry, art, and cash. We've tried to handle this quietly, but she's become increasingly unstable and threatening. This recording serves as my testimony that I fear for my family's safety. It was dated yesterday. Gerald had recorded this false confession before they'd even locked me in the basement, preparing for every possible scenario. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. They had constructed an elaborate trap, with evidence to support any narrative they chose. If I stayed quiet, I'd be arrested for theft. If I spoke up about the harassment, they'd play the extortion angle. If I tried to expose their crimes, they'd claim I was a disgruntled criminal making false accusations. But they had made one critical error. They'd recorded their true confession in their own emails. And now I had access to everything. The hunter had become the hunted. I cracked my knuckles and began to type. I began with something small, almost experimental. A transfer of $50,000 from one of Gerald's personal accounts to Children's Hospital, specifically earmarked for Maya's treatment fund. It would look like a legitimate charitable donation, the kind the Whitmores made regularly for tax purposes. The transaction went through smoothly. Then I transferred another $100,000 to the hospital's general fund for pediatric cancer research, and another $50,000 to a homeless shelter downtown. Small amounts, relatively speaking, from accounts that held millions. But as I worked, an idea began to form. A plan that would do more than just help Maya or ease my own financial burdens. A plan that would expose the Whitmores for what they really were and ensure that justice was served not just for me, but for everyone they had exploited over the years. Above me, crystal glasses clinked as the city's puppet masters celebrated another successful evening of buying and selling justice. But now their casual corruption was being recorded by the very woman they tried to silence. The Henderson development is moving faster than expected, came Senator Morrison's voice through the floorboards. I hadn't recognized him in the guest list, but his distinctive laugh was unmistakable. The family displacement should be complete by Christmas. What about the lawsuits? This was Patricia Blackwood, her tone suggesting she was asking about a minor inconvenience rather than families being torn from their homes. Judge Hamilton will dismiss them, Gerald replied with the confidence of a man who had bought his verdict in advance. Some paperwork issues with the filings, I'm told. The laughter that followed made my stomach turn. I was recording every word through Gerald's computer microphone, but more importantly, I was cross-referencing the speakers with the financial records. Each name mentioned was connected to accounts I now controlled. Senator Morrison. $500,000 in consulting fees from a Whitmore shell company. Judge Hamilton. Mortgage mysteriously paid off by another fake Whitmore charity. Patricia Blackwood. Joint investments with the Whitmores in the pharmaceutical company that was price gouging Maya's cancer medications. But then I heard something that made my blood freeze. The Jenkins situation is contained. Victoria's voice drifted down. By tomorrow, she'll be arrested and discredited. No one will believe anything she says after that. What if she talks before the arrest? Asked someone I didn't recognize. She won't have the chance. Gerald's voice was cold, calculating. I've arranged for her to have an accident on the way to the police station. Car troubles, you understand. Sometimes old cars just break down permanently. They weren't just planning to frame me. They were planning to kill me. And the environmental impact study? Asked someone I didn't recognize. What environmental impact study? Gerald's response was met with more laughter. I opened my laptop again and began to record the conversation using the built-in microphone. This wasn't just idle rich people chatter. This was evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and corruption at the highest levels. The charity auction next month should raise another few million for the foundation. Victoria's voice joined the conversation. I've arranged for several pieces from our private collection to be donated. The tax write-off alone will save us more than the pieces are worth. How delightfully circular, came Patricia Blackwood's amused response. We donate art to our own foundation, take the tax deduction, then buy it back at auction for a fraction of the declared value. The beauty of charitable work, Gerald said. And I could hear the clink of crystal glasses as they toasted their own cleverness. The basement suddenly felt like a tomb, my tomb. My hands shook as I realized I wasn't just locked in here to be humiliated. I was locked in here to die. But Gerald had made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance, he'd revealed his plan while sitting directly above his own computer, which was now recording everything and uploading it automatically to the cloud storage I'd set up years ago. I opened a new window and began typing frantically. If they were going to kill me, I was going to make sure the whole world knew why. The first email went to every major news outlet in the city, with automated send times staggered throughout the next 24 hours. If I didn't cancel them, the story would break whether I was alive or dead. The second went to the FBI's anonymous tip line, complete with audio recordings and financial records. The third went to Sarah, though I didn't know yet that she was far more prepared to receive it than I could have imagined. But I wasn't finished. If they wanted to play games with people's lives, I was going to show them what real consequences looked like. I opened the banking interface and began the largest financial transfer in history. Not to help Maya, but to destroy the very foundation of their power. Marcus Whitmore's footsteps on the stairs sounded like a death march. When he appeared in the basement doorway, his usual smirk was replaced by something far more dangerous, cold calculation. Step away from the computer, Evelyn. His voice carried none of its usual condescending charm. This wasn't the soft, privileged boy I'd watched grow up. This was a man who just heard his family discuss murder. You heard the conversation upstairs, I said, not moving from Gerald's chair. Every word. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, small, silver, expensive looking. Which is why this has to look like suicide. Distraught employee, overwhelmed by guilt over her theft, takes her own life rather than face justice. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. You really think you can kill me and get away with it? I think desperate times call for decisive action. He moved closer and I could see his hands shaking slightly. Marcus might be holding a gun, but he wasn't a natural killer. This doesn't have to be painful, Evelyn. Just step away from the computer and we can make this quick. Before I die, I said, buying time while my fingers flew over the keyboard behind my back, I'd like to know something. How long have you known about your grandfather? Marcus froze. What grandfather? Gerald's father. The one who made the family fortune running illegal gambling operations in the 1940s. The one whose blood money built this entire empire. I'd found the records in Gerald's personal files, documentation of the Whitmore family's criminal origins going back 3 generations. You don't know what you're talking about. I know your great-grandfather laundered money for the mob. I know your grandfather expanded into drugs and prostitution. I know this family has been criminal for 80 years, and you're just the latest generation to carry on the tradition. Marcus's face went pale. None of that matters now, doesn't it? Because I just sent copies of those records to the IRS, the FBI, and every major newspaper in the country. Even if you kill me, the truth is already out there. It was a bluff. I'd only had time to prepare the emails, not send them yet. But Marcus didn't know that. You're lying. Check your father's computer. See for yourself. Marcus hesitated, torn between watching me and verifying my claim. In that moment of indecision, I made my move. I'd been cleaning houses for 35 years, moving furniture, lifting heavy objects, staying physically strong even as I aged. Marcus was soft, weakened by a lifetime of privilege. I grabbed Gerald's heavy crystal paperweight and hurled it at the basement's main light switch. The room plunged into darkness just as Marcus pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. I felt the bullet was past my ear as I dove behind Gerald's desk, my heart exploding with adrenaline. You crazy old bitch, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with panic. I stayed low, crawling toward the wine cellar where I knew there was a second light switch. Behind me, I could hear Marcus stumbling around in the dark, cursing as he bumped into furniture. This was supposed to be simple, he muttered, and I realized he was talking to himself, trying to work up the courage for another shot. Just one bullet staged the scene, call the police. Why did you have to make this difficult? I reached the wine cellar and flicked on the emergency lighting. Dim red bulbs cast eerie shadows across the basement. Enough to see but not enough for Marcus to get a clear shot. You want to know what's really funny? I called out, moving between the wine racks for cover. Your father left something out of his little murder plan. Shut up. He doesn't know about the life insurance policy I took out last year. The one that pays double for accidental death or murder. Another lie, but Marcus was too rattled to think clearly. If I die tonight, my daughter gets $2 million and a very good reason to investigate exactly what happened to me. I heard Marcus reload the gun with shaking hands. No one's going to investigate anything. You're a thief who killed herself rather than face justice. Sarah's not going to accept that explanation. Sarah's a nurse. What's she going to do, take my temperature to death? I almost laughed despite the circumstances. Marcus had no idea what his family was really dealing with. You know what I did while you were upstairs planning my murder? I called out, moving to a new position among the wine bottles. I transferred every penny your family stole back to the charities it came from. The Henderson Development Fund? Gone. The judge's mortgage payments? Reversed. Your father's offshore accounts? Empty. The silence that followed was more terrifying than his shouting had been. You're lying, he said finally, but his voice was small, uncertain. Check the computer yourself. Or better yet, call your father down here. I'm sure he'll love to hear how you let a 67-year-old housekeeper outmaneuver you with a paperweight. I heard him moving toward the desk, saw the glow of the computer screen as he logged in. Then came the sound I'd been waiting for. A sharp intake of breath as he saw the banking records. You destroyed us, he whispered. No, I said, stepping out from behind the wine rack with Gerald's antique letter opener in my hand. I saved you. Your family's money was stolen. I just gave it back. Now you have a chance to be something other than criminals. Marcus spun toward me, raising the gun, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't aim. The weight of what I'd done, what his family had lost, was crushing him. Put the gun down, Marcus. It's over. Instead, he pressed the barrel to his own temple. If we lose everything, if this all comes out, my family is finished. Do you understand that? For generations of building this empire, and you destroyed it in one night. Your empire was built on crime and suffering. I didn't destroy it. I exposed it. For a moment we stared at each other across the basement, predator and prey roles completely reversed. Then Marcus lowered the gun and sank into his father's chair. sobbing like the privileged child he'd always been. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said, picking up the phone to call 911, "you learn what justice feels like." The sirens were getting closer as I zip-tied Marcus's hands with cable ties from Gerald's desk drawer. 35 years of cleaning had taught me where everything was kept, including the supplies Gerald used for his special packages. "You called the police?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "I called everyone." I showed him my phone where automated emails were queued to send to the FBI, IRS, Department of Justice, and every major news outlet in the country. Funny thing about being invisible for so long, you learn how to work in the shadows. As the sirens grew louder, I made one final transfer, $500,000 from Gerald's emergency fund to Children's Hospital, specifically for Maya's experimental treatment. Not enough to bankrupt them, but enough to save my granddaughter's life. The basement door burst open as federal agents stormed down the stairs, followed by local police and paramedics. Marcus looked up at them with the dazed expression of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. "Sir, we need you to drop any weapons and step away from the computer," ordered Agent Patricia Morrison, the FBI investigator leading the team. "The weapon's over there," I said, pointing to where Marcus had dropped the gun. "And the computer has everything you need to understand what's been happening in this house for the past 30 years. Agent Morrison looked between Marcus, who was still cable-tied and sobbing, and me, standing calmly beside Gerald's desk with blood on my arms from crawling through broken glass in the wine cellar. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here tonight?" "What happened?" I said, looking directly at Marcus. "Is that a family of criminals finally met someone who couldn't be bought, threatened, or silenced." The next few hours were a blur of statements, evidence collection, and phone calls. Gerald and Victoria were arrested upstairs, still in their dinner party clothes, as federal agents seized computers, financial records, and boxes of documents that would keep prosecutors busy for years. But it was Sarah Chin's arrival that really drove home the magnitude of what I'd unleashed. The investigative journalist burst through the basement door with her photographer, eyes bright with the excitement of someone who'd just been handed the story of a lifetime. "Mrs. Jenkins, can you confirm that you've uncovered evidence of a multi-generational criminal conspiracy involving the Whitmore family?" "I can confirm," I said, exhaustion finally setting in, "that some people mistake invisibility for blindness. They thought I couldn't see what they were doing, couldn't understand what I was witnessing. They were wrong." Sarah's article would run the next morning with the headline, "The Housekeeper Who Brought Down an Empire." But as I sat in the back of an ambulance being treated for cuts and shock, I wasn't thinking about headlines or justice or vindication. I was thinking about Maya, and how she would never have to worry about medical bills again. Family. I transferred it all to a newly created trust fund for Maya's medical care, managed by an independent trustee who would ensure the money was used solely for her treatments and future medical needs. As the final transfer processed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of justice served. But I wasn't finished yet. The holding cell at the federal building was cleaner than I'd expected, but the irony wasn't lost on me. After 35 years of cleaning other people's messes, I was finally in a place where someone else had to clean up mine. Agent Morrison sat across from me in the interview room, a thick file spread between us. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see the wheels turning as she tried to process everything that had happened. "Mrs. Jenkins, I need to understand the timeline here. You claim you discovered the Whitmore financial crimes last night, but these transfers show a level of sophistication that suggests longer-term planning." "Agent Morrison, I have a PhD in computer science from MIT. I earned it over 15 years of night school while working full-time and raising 2 children as a single mother. Just because I clean toilets for a living doesn't mean I didn't know how to clean out bank accounts." She looked up from the file, surprise flickering across her features. "You have a PhD? Summa cum laude. Specialization in financial systems and digital security. I wrote my dissertation on vulnerabilities in electronic banking networks." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. The Whitmores hired me to clean their house. They never bothered to ask what else I was qualified to do. "And you never told them? Would you? When you're a 67-year-old black woman trying to keep a job that pays for your granddaughter's medical care, you don't voluntarily make yourself look overqualified." Agent Morrison was taking notes now, her pen moving rapidly across the paper. Walk me through what happened when Marcus confronted you. I described the basement encounter, the gun, the desperate struggle in the dark. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from professional skepticism to something approaching awe. He actually tried to kill you? He tried. But Marcus Whitmore was a soft man who'd never had to fight for anything in his life. I've been scrubbing floors and moving furniture for decades. When it came down to physical confrontation, there was no contest. A knock on the door interrupted us. Agent Morrison stepped outside for a whispered conversation, then returned with an expression I couldn't read. Mrs. Jenkins, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. She says she's your daughter. My heart stopped. Sarah's here. She's been here all night, actually. Apparently, she's been working with our Financial Crimes Division on this case. The door opened and Sarah walked in wearing a crisp FBI windbreaker over jeans and a t-shirt. But it was the badge clipped to her belt that made everything click into place. Hello, Mom. You're FBI? The words came out as a whisper. Sarah sat down across from me, her professional composure slipping to reveal the daughter I thought I knew. Financial Crimes Division. I've been undercover for the past 18 months, investigating charity fraud and money laundering among the city's elite. The room spun around me. Maya's treatments. Your nursing job. The treatments are real, Mom. Maya's cancer, the experimental therapies, all of that is genuine. My FBI salary and benefits have been covering the costs. She leaned forward, her voice urgent. The nursing job at Children's Hospital was my cover. It gave me access to the medical charity networks that families like the Whitmores have been exploiting for decades. I stared at my daughter, this woman I thought I knew, and felt a rage building that made my anger at the Whitmores pale in comparison. You used your own daughter's illness as cover for an investigation? I used my position to make sure children like Maya could get the care they need. Sarah shot back. Do you have any idea how many families have been destroyed by medical charity fraud? How many children have died because money meant for their treatments was stolen by people like the Whitmores? How many nights were you working late when Maya needed you? How many times did I hold my granddaughter while she cried for her mother, believing you were pulling double shifts to save her life? Sarah's composure cracked. I was saving her life, and the lives of thousands of other children. This investigation has uncovered the largest medical charity fraud ring in the country's history. By lying to your own family for 18 months. Agent Morrison cleared her throat. Mrs. Jenkins, if I may interrupt, your daughter's work on this case has been exemplary. She's gathered evidence that will put dozens of corrupt individuals behind bars and recover millions of dollars stolen from legitimate charities. And what about the evidence I gathered? I asked, my voice ice cold. What about the 35 years I spent in that house, watching these people destroy lives? Where was my exemplary daughter when Gerald Whitmore put his hands on me? Sarah went pale. What? 3 weeks ago. Your mother's boss sexually harassed her, and when she rejected his advances, the family framed her for theft to discredit her. Agent Morrison consulted her notes. Mrs. Jenkins, why didn't you report this incident? To who? The police department that Gerald Whitmore helped elect? The DA whose campaign he funded? The judges whose mortgages his shell companies mysteriously paid off? I laughed bitterly. I'm a 67-year-old black housekeeper accusing one of the city's most prominent citizens. Without evidence, it would have been my word against his. I didn't know, Sarah said quietly. If I had known. You didn't know because you weren't doing your job as a daughter. You were so focused on building your career that you forgot you had a family. The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Morrison looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. The question now, she said finally, is how we proceed. Mrs. Jenkins, technically you interfered with an ongoing federal investigation. The unauthorized access to private accounts, the money transfers. The money transfers that your 18-month investigation failed to achieve? I interrupted. I recovered more stolen funds in one night than your daughter managed in a year and a half. Agent Morrison's jaw tightened. That's not how federal investigations work, Mrs. Jenkins. We follow protocols, build airtight cases, while children die waiting for treatments they can't afford. I stood up, suddenly tired of the whole conversation. Are you going to arrest me for stealing money from thieves and giving it to the people they robbed? Sarah and Agent Morrison exchanged a look that told me they'd already discussed this possibility. What's your recommendation, Agent Patterson? Morrison asked formally. Sarah looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. My recommendation is that Evelyn Jenkins be recognized as a confidential informant whose actions directly led to the successful conclusion of Operation Charity Shield. Her unauthorized access to the Whitmore accounts resulted in the recovery of over $50 million in stolen funds and provided evidence crucial to securing convictions. And the money transfers? Restitution. The money went exactly where the Whitmore Foundation claimed it was going for years. If anything, Mrs. Jenkins completed the charitable work that the foundation was legally obligated to perform. Agent Morrison nodded slowly. We'll need you to sign some documents, Mrs. Jenkins. Confidentiality agreements, witness statements, cooperation agreements. But it looks like you'll be walking out of here as a free woman and a recognized hero. As the paperwork was processed, Sarah and I sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally she spoke. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. But everything I did was to protect you and Maya. By lying to us for 18 months? By making sure that when this case broke, you wouldn't be seen as connected to a federal agent. If anyone had known you were my mother, your testimony would have been compromised. The defense would have claimed the whole thing was a setup. I stared at this daughter I thought I knew. And Maya's treatments? Were they really necessary? Or just convenient for your cover story? Sarah's face crumpled. Mom, every treatment, every doctor visit, every sleepless night in the hospital, that's all real. Maya's illness isn't part of any operation. The FBI health insurance is how we've been able to afford the experimental treatments, but her need for them is genuine. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. My daughter had used her position to get the best possible medical care for her child, while simultaneously using that child's illness to maintain cover for an investigation that would ultimately save other children. Was she a hero saving lives? Or a mother who had deceived her family? The answer I was beginning to realize was both. But there was still one more revelation to come, one that would change everything I thought I knew about this case. 3 days later, I was sitting in the FBI field office reviewing my final statement when Agent Morrison entered with a manila envelope marked confidential. Mrs. Jenkins, there's something we found in Gerald Whitmore's personal safe that you need to see. It changes the entire context of this case. Inside the envelope was a DNA test result dated 15 years ago. Along with a handwritten letter I recognized immediately, my mother's careful script on yellowed paper. The DNA test showed that Gerald Whitmore was my biological father. My mother worked as a seamstress, I said slowly, staring at the papers. She never talked about my father. I always assumed. According to the letter, it was a relationship that lasted several years in the early 1970s, Agent Morrison said gently. Your mother ended it when she realized Gerald would never acknowledge you publicly, but he apparently continued to support you financially throughout your life. I read my mother's letter with shaking hands. She had written it just before her death, explaining the truth she'd never been able to tell me. My darling Evelyn, Gerald wanted to marry me, but his family would never accept a black woman as a daughter-in-law. We both knew this. But he promised to take care of you and he has kept that promise. The job with his family, the salary advances, the help when you needed it. It all came from a father's love, even if he could never say the words. The letter ended with a plea. Don't judge him too harshly. He has lived with this secret his whole life, loving you from a distance but never able to claim you as his daughter. Agent Morrison pulled out another document, financial records showing decades of payments. There's more. Gerald Whitmore has been supporting your family for 35 years. College tuition for Sarah, help with your ex-husband's gambling debts, salary advances whenever you asked. He even established a trust fund for Maya's medical care before she was diagnosed with cancer. The room spun around me. The trust fund, set up 3 years ago, managed by an independent trustee. The experimental treatments Maya has been receiving? They've been paid for by this trust, not by Sarah's FBI insurance. I felt like I was drowning. Everything I thought I knew about my life was wrong. Gerald Whitmore, the man I'd destroyed, the criminal I'd exposed, the father I'd never known. had been secretly taking care of his family for decades. Does this change anything? Agent Morrison asked carefully. About your testimony about the case? I thought about it for a long moment. Gerald Whitmore might have been my father, but he was still a criminal who had stolen millions from charities meant to help children. He had still sexually harassed me, still tried to frame me for theft. The money he'd given my family over the years didn't erase the harm he'd done to countless others. No, I said finally. It doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes it worse. He knew who I was, and he still treated me like I was invisible when it mattered. But privately, I wondered. If Gerald had been supporting my family all these years, what did that make me? A daughter who had finally gotten justice, or someone who had destroyed the man who had secretly loved her from afar? Sarah entered the room just as I was processing this revelation. She took one look at the paper spread across the table and sank into a chair. You knew, I said, reading her expression. You knew he was my father. I suspected, she admitted. When I started investigating the Whitmore finances, I found the payments to our family going back decades. The pattern was too consistent, too personal to be random charity. But I couldn't prove the connection without compromising my cover. So you let me work for my own father without knowing who he was? I let you make your own choices based on your own conscience, Sarah said firmly. If I had told you Gerald was your father, would you have exposed his crimes? Or would you have protected him out of some misguided sense of family loyalty? The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to say that justice would have won out, that I would have done the right thing regardless. But the truth was I didn't know. Learning that Gerald was my father had already begun to complicate my feelings about what I'd done. There's something else, Agent Morrison said reluctantly. Gerald Whitmore died in federal custody this morning. Heart attack. His lawyer said he'd been asking to see you, but we couldn't arrange it because of the ongoing investigation. The news hit me like a physical blow. My father, the word still felt strange, had died without ever acknowledging our relationship, without explaining why he'd supported me while simultaneously treating me as less than human. What did he want to tell me? I asked. We'll never know. But his lawyer gave us this. Agent Morrison handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Gerald's shaky handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words. I'm sorry, my daughter. And despite everything, the crimes, the harassment, the years of degradation, I began to cry for the father I'd never known I had, and for the complicated legacy of love and criminality he'd left behind. D tried to have me arrested, who had treated me like property for 35 years, was my father. The harassment, I said slowly, the pieces clicking together. He was drunk, and he said something about me not knowing my place, about how I should be grateful for everything he'd given me. I thought he was talking about the job. He was talking about a lifetime of secret support, Sarah said. College tuition for your daughter, help with your ex-husband's gambling debts, advance payments whenever you needed them. He's been taking care of you your entire adult life, but he could never acknowledge why. The irony was devastating. I had destroyed the financial empire of the man who had been secretly supporting my family for decades. The money I had transferred to Maya's medical fund, some of it had originally been intended for exactly that purpose. Does this change anything? Sarah asked gently. About the story, I mean. About what you did. I thought about it for a long moment. Gerald Whitmore might have been my biological father, but he had also been a criminal who had stolen millions from charities meant to help children. He had sexually harassed me and tried to frame me for theft to cover it up. The fact that he had been sending money to my family didn't erase the harm he had done to countless others. No, I said finally. It doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes it worse. He knew who I was and he still treated me like I was nothing. But privately, I wondered. If Gerald had been supporting my family all these years, what did that make me? Was I a victim who had finally gotten justice, or was I someone who had bitten the hand that fed her? The moral complexity of the situation was overwhelming, but one thing remained clear. The criminal enterprise had to be exposed, regardless of my personal connection to it. 2 weeks later, as the federal investigation expanded and more arrests were made, I received a call that changed everything once again. Mrs. Jenkins? This is Detective Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need you to come in for questioning. My stomach dropped. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but we've discovered some irregularities in your story that we need to clarify. At the police station, Detective Rodriguez led me to an interview room where a woman I didn't recognize was waiting. She was in her 50s, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Mrs. Jenkins, this is Agent Sandra Voss with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. She has some questions about your relationship with the Whitmore family. Agent Voss opened a thick file and spread photographs across the table. They were surveillance photos of me, taken over the past several months. Me entering the Whitmore house, me at the bank, me at Maya's hospital. Mrs. Jenkins, how long have you been working with federal law enforcement? The question caught me completely off guard. I'm sorry, what? We know about the operation, Agent Voss said calmly. We know you've been gathering evidence on the Whitmore financial crimes for the past 18 months. What we don't understand is why you broke protocol and acted without authorization. I stared at her, genuinely confused. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't work for law enforcement. Agent Voss exchanged a look with Detective Rodriguez, then opened another file. Inside was a photograph of a woman who looked remarkably like me, but younger. The resemblance was so strong it was almost like looking at myself 20 years ago. This is FBI agent Evelyn Patterson, Agent Voss said. She's been working undercover for the past 2 years, investigating financial crimes in the city's wealthy elite. She was specifically assigned to gather evidence on the Whitmore family. My heart stopped. Patterson is my maiden name. My mother's maiden name. Agent Patterson is your daughter, Mrs. Jenkins. Sarah Patterson, though she goes by Sarah Jenkins professionally to protect her cover. The room spun around me. My daughter Sarah, who I thought was working double shifts as a nurse to pay for Maya's medical care, was actually an FBI agent who had been investigating the same family I had been cleaning for. That's impossible, I whispered. Sarah is a nurse. She works at Children's Hospital. I've seen her there. She does work at the hospital, Agent Voss confirmed. It's part of her cover. She's been using her position there to investigate the Whitmore Children's Foundation and other medical charity frauds. But her primary job is as a federal agent. The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. Sarah's expensive medical training that she had somehow afforded on a single mother's salary. Her knowledge of financial matters that seemed beyond what a nurse would need to know. The way she always seemed to have just enough money to cover Maya's treatments, despite the enormous costs. She's been using Maya's illness, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. She's been using her own daughter's cancer as cover for an FBI investigation. Maya's illness is real, Agent Voss said quickly. The treatments, the medical needs, all of that is genuine. But yes, Agent Patterson has been using the situation to maintain her cover and get close to the medical charity network that the Whitmores have been exploiting. I thought of all the times Sarah had been at work during crucial moments in Maya's treatment. All the nights she had been absent when her daughter needed her, supposedly pulling double shifts to pay for medical care that was actually being funded by her FBI salary. Where is she now? I asked. She's here, Detective Rodriguez said. She's been in the building since your arrests began, coordinating with the financial crimes team. She didn't know you were involved until you started transferring money from the Whitmore accounts. She didn't know? The anger was building in my chest like a storm. Her own mother was working for the same family she was investigating, and she didn't know? The compartmentalization of information is standard in undercover operations, Agent Voss explained. Agent Patterson knew that Evelyn Jenkins worked for the Whitmores, but she didn't know that Evelyn Jenkins was her mother, until she saw the bank transfer records with your digital signature. A door opened and Sarah walked in. She looked exactly like the daughter I knew, but somehow completely different. The exhausted single mother was gone, replaced by a composed federal agent in a crisp business suit. Mom, she said quietly, taking a seat across from me. Don't call me that, I snapped. Federal agents don't get to call their victims Mom. Sarah flinched. You're not a victim. You're a hero. What you did exposed the largest financial crime ring in the city's history. What I did was clean up a mess that you were supposed to be handling. I shot back. While you were playing spy games, I was actually in that house watching these people destroy lives. Where were you when Gerald Whitmore put his hands on me? Where were you when they locked me in that basement? I didn't know. You didn't know because you weren't doing your job. The words came out louder than I intended, fueled by months of suppressed rage and betrayal. You let me believe my granddaughter might die because we couldn't afford her treatments, while you were getting paid by the FBI to investigate charity fraud. You let me work for criminals, let me be harassed and humiliated. All so you could maintain your precious cover. Sarah's composure cracked. I was trying to build a case that would put them away forever. I was trying to help people. You were trying to build your career, I interrupted. And you used your own family as bait. The silence in the room was deafening. Agent Voss and Detective Rodriguez looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The question now, Agent Voss said finally, is what happens next? Mrs. Jenkins, technically you interfered with an ongoing federal investigation. The money transfers, while morally justified, were still unauthorized access to private accounts. Are you going to arrest me for stealing money from thieves? That's what we need to determine, she replied. Agent Patterson, what's your recommendation? Sarah looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. My recommendation is that Evelyn Jenkins be recognized as a confidential informant who provided crucial assistance in exposing the Whitmore criminal enterprise. Her actions, while unauthorized, directly led to the recovery of over $200 million in stolen funds and the arrest of 37 individuals involved in the conspiracy. And the money transfers? The money went to legitimate charities and medical funds that should have received it years ago through the Whitmore Foundation. I recommend that those transfers be classified as restitution rather than theft. Agent Voss nodded slowly. We'll need you to sign some documents, Mrs. Jenkins. Confidentiality agreements, witness statements, that sort of thing. But it looks like you'll be walking out of here as a free woman. As the paperwork was processed, Sarah and I sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally she spoke. I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. But I need you to know that everything I did was to protect you and Maya. By lying to us for 2 years? By making sure that when this case broke, you wouldn't be seen as complicit. If anyone had known you were related to a federal agent, your testimony would have been compromised. The defense would have claimed you were part of a setup. I stared at her. This daughter I thought I knew. What about Maya's treatments? Are they real? Or part of your cover too? They're real, Mom. Every treatment, every doctor visit, every sleepless night in the hospital, that's all real. The FBI has excellent health insurance, which is how we've been able to afford the experimental treatments. But Maya's illness, her need for care, that's not part of any operation. That's just our life. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. My daughter had used her position as an FBI agent to get the best possible medical care for her child, while simultaneously using that child's illness to maintain her cover in an investigation that would ultimately save other children from similar fates. Was she a hero or a villain? Was I? The questions would haunt me for months to come. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Gerald Whitmore receive a sentence of 25 years in prison for financial crimes, tax evasion, and racketeering. Victoria received 15 years for her role in the money laundering operation. Marcus, in exchange for his cooperation, received 5 years in forfeiture of his assets. The trial had been a media sensation, with daily coverage of the basement revelations case. I had become something of a folk hero, the grandmother who took down a criminal empire to save her granddaughter's life. Book deals and movie offers poured in, all of which I declined. The money I had transferred to Maya's medical fund had been legally transferred to a trust managed by the court, ensuring that she would receive the best possible care for the rest of her life. The experimental treatments were working. Her cancer was in remission, and her doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. But success felt hollow when it was built on such a foundation of deception and betrayal. Sarah and I still spoke, but our relationship had fundamentally changed. She had been commended by the FBI for her work on the case, and was being considered for promotion. She was a hero in the eyes of law enforcement and the media. I couldn't bring myself to feel proud of her. The moral complexity of what we had all done, Gerald's secret support of my family, my destruction of his criminal empire, Sarah's use of her daughter's illness to further an investigation, defied easy categorization. There were no clear heroes or villains, Just people making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. As I watched Gerald being led away in shackles, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This man who had harmed so many people, who had treated me as less than human for 35 years, was also the father who had secretly supported my family and the grandfather who had unknowingly funded his great-granddaughter's medical care. Justice had been served, but it tasted more bitter than sweet. 1 year after the arrests, I received an unexpected visitor at my new apartment, a modest place that I could actually afford thanks to the reward money I had received for my cooperation with federal investigators. Marcus Whitmore stood at my door, looking like a shadow of his former self. Prison had aged him dramatically, and his expensive suits had been replaced by simple clothes that hung loosely on his diminished frame. "What do you want?" I asked, not inviting him in. "To apologize," he said simply, "and to give you something." He held out an envelope thick and yellowed with age. "I found this among my father's personal effects when we were cleaning out the house. I thought you should have it." Inside the envelope was a letter in my mother's handwriting, dated just weeks before her death in 1985. It was addressed to me, but I had never seen it before. "My dearest Evelyn," it began. "If you are reading this, then Gerald has finally found the courage to give you the truth I never could. I know this will be hard to understand, but I need you to know that everything I did was out of love. Love for you, and yes, love for your father despite everything that happened between us." The letter went on to explain the circumstances of my conception, not the violent encounter I had always imagined, but a love affair between a young seamstress and the heir to a fortune who could never publicly acknowledge their relationship. "Gerald wanted to marry me," my mother had written, "but his family would never have accepted a black woman as a daughter-in-law. We both knew this. But he promised to take care of you, and he has kept that promise. The job with his family, the advances when you needed money, the trust fund for your children's education. All of that came from a father's love, even if he could never express it openly." The letter ended with a plea. "Don't judge him too harshly, my darling. He has lived with the weight of this secret his entire life, loving you from a distance and never being able to claim you as his daughter. In his own way, he has tried to be the father you deserved." I looked up at Marcus, who was watching me with an expression of profound sadness. "He never told you about the letter?" I asked. "He couldn't. He said giving it to you would have been selfish, that it would have made his guilt your burden." Marcus paused, struggling with his own emotions. "He loved you, Evelyn. In his twisted, damaged way, he really loved you. And he was proud of you, prouder than he ever was of me. That doesn't excuse what he did. The harassment, the false accusations." "No, it doesn't," Marcus agreed. "My father was a criminal and a coward. But he was also a man who spent 40 years trying to atone for a choice he made when he was young and weak. It doesn't make him good, but it makes him human." After Marcus left, I sat with my mother's letter for hours, trying to reconcile the Gerald Whitmore I had known with the man described in her words. The criminal who had stolen millions from charity. The father who had secretly supported his daughter for decades. The coward who had sexually harassed me. The man who had been quietly proud of my strength and intelligence. All of these contradictory truths existed simultaneously, and I was forced to accept that people are complex, that evil and good can coexist in the same person, that justice and injustice can be intertwined in ways that defy simple understanding. 2 years after the Whitmore scandal broke, I was invited to speak at a conference on financial crime and whistleblowing. The invitation came from Dr. Patricia Harmon, the director of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the woman who had taken over the investigation after Sarah's conflicted role was discovered. The conference was held at a luxury hotel, the kind of place I had only seen from the service entrance during my years as a housekeeper. Now I walked through the front door as an honored guest, wearing a dress that Sarah had helped me pick out and carrying myself with a confidence I had never possessed before. My speech was simple and direct. For 35 years I was invisible. I cleaned the houses of the wealthy, served their food, listened to their conversations, and learned their secrets. They never saw me as a threat because they never saw me as fully human. That invisibility was my greatest weapon. The audience, a mix of law enforcement officials, journalists, and financial crime experts, listened intently as I described the systematic corruption I had witnessed, the casual cruelty of people who believed their wealth made them untouchable, and the moment when I decided to fight back. I didn't set out to be a hero, I concluded. I set out to save my granddaughter's life. But sometimes individual acts of desperation can expose systemic injustice. Sometimes the people with the least power are the ones best positioned to bring down those who abuse their power. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but the real reward came afterward, when a young black woman approached me during the reception. "Mrs. Jenkins, my name is Dr. Kenya Williams. I'm a forensic accountant with the Department of Justice. I wanted to thank you for your courage, and to tell you that your case has inspired a new protocol for investigating financial crimes among the wealthy elite. We're calling it the Jenkins Method, using domestic workers and service employees as confidential informants to expose white-collar crime. The idea that my experience could help other people in similar situations brought me more satisfaction than all the media attention and book deals combined." Later that evening, I had dinner with Sarah and Maya at the hotel restaurant. My granddaughter, now 9 years old and healthy, chattered excitedly about her school science project while Sarah and I maintained the polite but distant relationship we had settled into. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Sarah said as we walked back to our rooms. "For the speech. For everything. For having the courage to do what was right, even when it was dangerous. For exposing those criminals. For saving Maya." She paused. "For forgiving me, even though I know you haven't fully forgiven me yet." I stopped walking and looked at my daughter, this complex woman who was both an FBI hero and someone who had deceived her own family for years. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "What you did was wrong, but what you were trying to accomplish was right. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Try to do more good than harm, even when the choices are all bad." Sarah nodded, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw not the FBI agent but the scared young mother who had been desperately trying to save her daughter's life while also serving her country. Maybe forgiveness was possible after all. 5 years after that night in the basement, I received a call that brought the story full circle. "Mrs. Jenkins, this is Judge Martinez from the Federal District Court. I wanted to personally inform you that the Whitmore Children's Foundation, which has been operating under court supervision since the convictions, has just completed its largest charitable distribution in history. Thanks to the recovered funds from the criminal case, we've been able to provide medical care to over 10,000 children who otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford treatment." The irony was perfect. Gerald Whitmore's stolen money, recovered through my actions, was finally doing what the foundation had always claimed to do. "There's something else," Judge Martinez continued. "The board of the reconstituted foundation has voted to establish the Evelyn Jenkins Award for Courage in Financial Transparency. It's an annual award that will recognize individuals who expose financial fraud at great personal risk. We'd like you to present the first award at next month's ceremony." Standing on the stage of the city's most prestigious concert hall, looking out at an audience that included many of the same wealthy families I had once served, I felt the weight of the journey I had traveled. From invisible domestic worker to nationally recognized whistleblower, from victim to victor, from silence to voice. The first recipient of the award was Rosa Gutierrez, a hotel housekeeper who had exposed a massive tax evasion scheme by documenting conversations she overheard while cleaning executive suites. Like me, she had been invisible until she chose to speak. "The powerful count on our silence," I said as I presented the award. "They count on our fear, our desperation, our belief that we have no choice but to accept injustice. But silence in the face of evil is complicity. And sometimes the people with the least to lose are the ones with the most to give." As the ceremony concluded, I caught sight of a familiar figure in the back of the auditorium. Marcus Whitmore, now working as a paralegal for a legal aid society, was applauding with tears in his eyes. Our eyes met across the crowded room and he nodded. A gesture of respect, acknowledgement, and perhaps forgiveness. Later, as I walked through the city streets where I had once hurried invisibly from one cleaning job to another, I reflected on the complexities of justice. Gerald Whitmore had died in prison 2 years earlier, never having the chance to make amends for his crimes or to acknowledge me as his daughter. Victoria had been released after serving her sentence and had disappeared from public life entirely. The Whitmore family fortune had been largely dissipated through legal fees, fines, and restitution payments. But Maya was alive and healthy, pursuing her dreams of becoming a doctor. Sarah had been promoted within the FBI and was working on cases involving human trafficking, still fighting for justice, but with a deeper understanding of the personal costs of her work. And I had found my voice, my purpose, my power. The basement where I had been locked away during that dinner party 5 years ago had been converted into a community meeting space for financial literacy classes. The irony was not lost on me. The place where I had been silenced had become a place where others learned to speak up about financial injustice. As I sit in my comfortable apartment, writing these final words, Maya is at the kitchen table doing her homework while Sarah reviews case files for her latest investigation. 3 generations of women, each shaped by the events that began in that basement 5 years ago. The moral questions that tormented me in the aftermath of the Whitmore exposé have not disappeared entirely, but they have evolved into something more manageable. An understanding that justice is rarely pure, that heroism is rarely simple, and that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to live with. I kept one secret from the FBI, from Sarah, from everyone. I didn't steal Gerald Whitmore's passwords or hack into his accounts. He had given me access years earlier, when Marcus asked for my help with the digital banking system. Gerald had been in the room during that conversation, had watched me set up the security protocols, had seen me memorize the passwords. He could have changed them at any time over the subsequent years. He could have restricted my access, updated the security, protected his criminal empire from the woman who cleaned his house and knew his secrets. He never did. In the end, Gerald Whitmore gave me the master key to his downfall. Whether it was guilt, a subconscious desire to be caught, or a father's twisted way of empowering his daughter, I'll never know. But he left the door open for me to walk through when the time came. Perhaps that was his final gift to me. The opportunity to choose justice over silence, courage over fear, truth over complicity. I chose well. And in the basement of his house, surrounded by stolen wealth and hidden crimes, I found not just the power to save my granddaughter's life, but the strength to save my own soul. The dinner party is over. The guests have gone home. The lights are out. But justice never sleeps.